Hello, it's July the 28th. This is Renew Every Morning, and I'm Paul Anderson-Walsh. Thank you, as always, for being with me. Well, we're continuing our series in the Postcards of Grace, and today we're going to have a look at a character who I'm going to call the Lion Chaser, a man who chased a lion in a snowy pit. Well, perhaps you'll remember who I'm talking about. This is a character by the name of Benaiah, and you can find Benaiah's story in 2 Samuel chapter 23, and about 3 verses, 23 to 23 or 24, something like that. But it simply says this. There's a verse that I wanted to pull out, which is just the most extraordinary statement. He went down into a pit on a snowy day and killed a lion. That's his story. Well, you know what? What do you run towards? That's the question. People say that you're known by not just what you run from, but what you run to. And this is somebody who runs towards a lion on a snowy day in a pit. I mean, it's quite something extraordinary. Most people would perhaps call that foolish, but sometimes, but faith, I guess, sometimes looks foolish in the face of fear. And there's something about the audacity of faith, the foolishness of faith, if you like, that would even enable somebody to do this. Now, this is a really interesting story, because obviously there's a lion prowling around who's distressing everybody. He's fallen into a pit, whether it's a cistern, the scripture doesn't really say, but nonetheless everybody's terrified of it. And so Benaiah, our character here, he runs into the cold, he runs into the dark, he goes into a treacherous space, and he won a victory that few other people could claim, I suspect. Now, his name is interesting because his name, I think, speaks a little bit to me of spiritual intelligence. Benaiah means Jehovah has built, and he lives like a man who's built by God. And he's a man that's built by God with spiritual intelligence, with this sort of holy courage and this quiet conviction. And what's interesting is that Benaiah is somebody who's not only born well, but he actually also lives well. And when Absalom squanders his privilege and the sons of Eli, the priests, disgrace their calling, Benaiah honours what he's inherited, and I think that's really rather amazing. And he flourishes, and he doesn't survive, he just shows up, and he overcomes giants, he conquers warriors, he doesn't flinch when he's confronted with this huge beast, the king of the jungle. But on the contrary, he knew who had built him, and he knew why he had been built. And that's the point. If God has built you, He's built you for this. And this is an important thing to understand, that whatever you're confronted with, whether it's a lion, whether it's a giant, whether it's an Egyptian with a spear, which you'll see is the case with Benaiah, God has built you, and He's built you for it. And there are 3 really interesting acts of fearless faith we see with him. If we were to look at Benaiah's resume, he strikes down the 2 sons of Ariel of Moab, which is interesting. He chased and killed this lion in the pit on a snowy day, and then he killed this towering Egyptian with the man's own spear. And these are kind of almost 3 impossible feats, but they are, even though there are 3 impossible sets of odds, Benaiah prevailed again and again and again. That's because he kind of almost, how should I say it, he functions in sort of covenantal power, and that's important. Now, again, what I find so interesting about Benaiah is that there's a little statement in 2 Samuel 23 that says this: these things Benaiah did. And remember what I've just told you, he did these things. He is able to strike down the 2 sons of Ariel of Moab. This is a massive deal. He chases the lion down, kills the lion in the pit, and he kills the Egyptian with his own spear. But it says he had a name, but he didn't have a name among the 3. These things Benaiah did, and had a name among the 30, and had a name among the mighty men. He was honoured. How does he say? He was honoured among the 30, but not among. But he didn't attain to the 3. That's right. That's what scripture says. That so Benaiah has this huge. He's part of the big 30 mighty men of David, if you like, but he's not he doesn't attain to the level of the three of the highest ones that David has. And I think that's significant, because if you think about the three mighty men, the three of the mighty men, you've got Joseb, and he's the one who kills 800 men with a spear in one encounter. So I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The 300 or any of those horrifying movies like that, but imagine this is one man who kills 800 men with a spear. I mean, that just beggars belief. Then you've got Eleazar. He fought so long and so hard that his hand froze to the sword. Can you imagine that? He's fighting for so long, his hand is frozen to the sword. That is just extraordinary. That's an act of relentless endurance. So if the first one is about staggering scale, this one's about endurance. And then you have Shammah, and Shammah stands alone in this field of lentils, you may remember, and defeated it when everybody else defended it, when everybody else fled. And that is an act of sort of unshakable resolve. So these are, if you like, David's three most heroic figures. But what's interesting about that is that each one of them performs these incredible battles, and they're all very public. But Benaiah's was different. His was kind of personal. His victories were sort of pit tested, if you like. There's no crowd, no army, no stage, nothing. Just a snowy pit, and this quiet, committed courage to go and do it anyway. And yet, although he doesn't make the podium, he doesn't have a podium finish, he has a name. And my point here is this: he might have only come fourth, but he came forth. And that's the point, right? In a world that's obsessed with being first, and second's nothing, best is the only thing you can be, Benaiah shows that your calling doesn't need comparison to be real. Fourth place doesn't mean failure. On the contrary, what we see here is something completely different. It might actually mean formation. You may not get the medal, you may not get the microphone, you may not get the podium, as I've said, but if God has built you, you're still going forth. You're enough. Not because of your rank, where you ranked in the list and the kind of all-time Hall of Famers, but because of who built you. Benaiah wasn't one of the three. No, he was not. But he was enough to be over the guard. He was enough for David. He was enough for God. And he was enough for himself, I suspect. And there's a very interesting bit of typology here about conquering our enemies, because if we look at these three acts, they're not just stories of courage. It seems to me they're spiritual metaphors. Let's take the lion in the pit, which is the one that he's most famous for. A picture of fear, of isolation, and the shadow of death. But Benaiah descended into this cold, dark grave, and he comes out alive, having confronted with a lion. And that's kind of resurrection faith. Then there's the Egyptian with the spear, an overwhelming adversary, superior weapons, but Benaiah disarmed him and turned his own weapon back on him. And that is spiritual warfare, if you like, which is about turning strongholds into testimonies, which I love. Then the sons of Ariel of Moab, that story about enemies with noble names. Ariel means lion of God. So notice that, would you? He's taken the lion, a man who's a lion, and a lion who's a man, and he overcomes them in extraordinary ways, because this is about I suppose it's about that ability to recognize what looks godly but actually isn't. So if you take the idea of Ariel having the idea of the lion of God, you have it's the appearance of godliness, but there's something else there. So Benaiah's story isn't just about history, it's about prophetic typology. He shows us what it means to confront fear, to what it means to overcome deception, and to take back ground at the most impossible odds. And what about the lion, by the way? The odds of you killing a lion with your bare hands are pretty remote. Lions weigh more than 400 pounds. One swipe or bite can kill a man. And this wasn't like a flat field where he had room for maneuver. This was a snowy, dark pit. The Bible gives no reason why the lion was there. But that's not what really matters. What really matters is he chose to go in. And that is power that's built on faith. It doesn't wait for warm days or easy ground. It walks into cold pits with conviction. It walks back out again. That's how it works. So the question really for us today is, what are we running from? And what are we running towards? Sometimes God calls us to a very place we want to avoid, the hard conversation, the quiet battle, our own snowy pit, if you like. But let me remind you, if God has built you, he's built you for this. So don't shrink, don't swerve, chase the lion, disarm the Egyptian, and overcome that which is masquerading as truth. All right, listen, great to be with you. Look forward to seeing you tomorrow. Bye-bye.